access.
Right, right. It asks you to log on as soon as you try to download it. Here's, oh, that's perfect. Okay.
Try ALEC 101, it doesn't work. Because I thought, I need the 101.
Well, any of the, if you wanted to see one of the legislative models, it looks like a link, and then it tells you, oh, no, sorry, log in, please. So any of these, you're not going to get a hold of, unless you're a member. But if you look at the language in all of these bills, as Bill Cronin pointed out, remarkably similar. So I think, we've always had lobbyists, and we've always had, or for a long, long time, and we've had think tanks like Cato that Stan mentions, but I think what's really kind of striking about this is that it's really a hybrid between legislative process and lobbying and think tanks. So you have the kind of policy research, or the slanted policy research, and they have the ear of the legislator right there. And so they're crafting this legislation and handing it over to the legislators to kind of pass through and making the most of it. So anyway, that's kind of the history, the background. And as far as it says on my introductory thing, that I'm going to talk about what they're going to talk about in Cincinnati, and I don't think anybody knows what they're going to be talking about in Cincinnati. Certainly charter schools, certainly the privatization of prisons, and other kind of states' rights issues, but
SB 5.
Sure. But as far as an agenda, there's not going to be a publication of the agenda, or who's in attendance, or there's this very little transparency here. I was surprised to even find that their members are listed on the state chairman, by state. That's about as many names as I could get. Anyway, so that's kind of all I have to say.
One of the most, can I comment? One of the things I found most interesting really was from Cronin's website. You can find some links that are connected to ALEC. One of them is, I think it's State Network Agency or something. But it's a subsidiary of ALEC, and it really tells people in the state legislatures all kinds of nuts and bolts stuff about how to do things.
Right, and they've definitely framed the discourse here. They've laid out the terms.
And one of the things I found most interesting was it told them how to find academics to argue their case for them. So that was sort of interesting.
So how do you do that?
Well, they say, let us know who you need. We'll connect you to our list of scholars.
It's interesting because they do have a board of scholarly directors too. There are 4 individuals. They're all conservative economists. Only one, I think, is identified as holding a PhD. And in all of the areas in which they're writing model legislation, so you can see the areas on the left-hand side, there are probably 100 model legislation bills or policy papers or publications that are listed there. And under education, in addition to the Sunshine Act that Ali mentioned, also the Bill of Rights, Students' Bill of Rights is on that website, as well as a lot of legislation around charter schools. And I've printed out some of the handouts before, at the end of the session. 2 is what ALEC says about charter schools, and then also a printout, 2 pages about charter schools and related legislation and lawsuits in the state of Ohio. Thank you, Allie.
Well, I just want to point to some of the literature that you can access. For instance, there's a beautifully produced, multiple pages, probably 30 pages of a PDF, about how price controls on pharmaceuticals actually causes all of these horrible effects. So it's in very plain language, but it sounds, as a rhetoric kind of person, I can't help but analyze the way, and it's really pretty ingenious.
Like they say on their website, they're free markets. It's everything.
Limited government, free markets, federalism.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Alex.
All right, I think I'm next on the list, is that right? Okay. What I'd like to do here is to, I'm John McNay, by the way, in case for somebody who might not know. I took Cronin's reading list and I added a few books that I like to read, that I've enjoyed reading anyway. And then going through his list, you know, I made a choice about what I wanted to talk about because if you look on top there, you've got a Brit writing about American politics. I wasn't really sure I was going to find that all that interesting. And then you go down to Gordon Nash, and this is a kind of an old book, but I did take a look at that. In fact, I brought a couple books with me. And this book by Nash is really it's kind of the classic. It is sort of encyclopedic in its coverage, although it's kind of limited in time period because you can see that it only comes up to 1976. Okay, so a lot of the recent developments aren't in here. No Reagan, for example. Lee Edwards was quite good, but on the other hand, you know, it's a Heritage Foundation person, and I figured that this wasn't really the kind of balanced look that I wanted to take a look at. Then you've got an encyclopedia, and then you have an anthology of classic texts. Okay, so looking at those, I decided David Farber's book was the best to try to focus in on. The Rise and Fall of Modern American Conservatism. It's a sweeping story about this, and it's also the newest. It just came out in 2010. And it covers things, the book doesn't really anticipate the recent election. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But also, David Farber is he's an acquaintance of mine. He teaches in Temple University's history department where I got my PhD, although he wasn't there when I was in the program. What I'd like to do here is talk. I've written some notes down about this, talk about what his book is about and what it tells us about the conservative movement. He traces this movement by taking us through 6 biographies of 6 different people. He starts with Ohio's Robert Taft. Okay, and he has a lot to say about Robert Taft, which is really quite interesting. He then moves on to William Buckley, Barry Goldwater, Phyllis Schlafly, I've always had trouble saying that, Schlafly, and Ronald Reagan. And then he ends up with George W. Bush. He feels that George W. Bush brought the conservative movement to an end. Okay, this is kind of a flaw in the last chapter. Again, he doesn't anticipate the next election. But we'll talk about that in a minute because I think there's still something worthwhile about what he tells us about this. He wants to see a unity in modern conservatism, and he defines this conservatism as a disciplinary order generated by hostility to market restraints and fueled by religious faith, devotion to social order, and an individualized conception of political liberty. So it's really about 3 pieces: market restraints, religious faith, social order, and an individualized conception of political liberty. In fact, they're kind of encapsulated there: limited government, federalism, and free markets. So this is kind of the central thread that seems to hold conservatism together. He also suggests that liberalism too is a disciplinary order, but Farber's dichotomy that he sets up here is that liberals want to discipline the market with government, where conservatives want to discipline individuals and use the market itself to do this. Okay, this is kind of an interesting way to turn these 2 things around.